This week on the Studio Live Today podcast, we are talking about Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference and everything that was announced, including their first foray into the world of AR, VR headsets. Yes, the Apple Vision Pro is the big story. Everyone's been talking about it, and we'll be chatting about it on the podcast here today, as well as going through all the other stuff, because I know it was the one more thing. It was big. People loved it. But there was a heap of other things that happened, and I'm going to call this Apple are dunking on everyone else, because they really are bringing everything: gaming, laptops, desktops, VR and AR headsets, iOS, iPad OS, Watch OS. It's all happening in the world of Apple. And if you're an Apple fan person, you're probably pretty stoked. If you're not, you may or may not care. But here's the thing. You don't have to be all in on all this stuff. But I think it's important for the future of everything, of technology and of music and video creation, because all of this is intertwined and interconnected. Even though a lot of these are consumption devices, if you're a music creator or a video creator in this community and you're listening to this podcast, you at least need to have a working knowledge of this stuff, even if it's not for you. And at $3,500, perhaps the Vision Pro is not for you. All of that is coming up here on the show. If it's your first time here, my name is Pete Johns, and this is Studio Live Today. My goal around here is to help you create, record, and release your best music. I do that through tips and tricks and tutorials and other videos on the YouTube channel Studio Live Today. We also have some amazing communities and places that you can get in touch with me, and you can find all of those over at studiolivetoday.com. Let's crack on in and talk about it, because we are going to save the Vision Pro to the end. Just like Apple, I'm going to go the one more thing, and we're going to talk about the Vision Pro headset, but we're going to do that right at the end here. Firstly, I want to talk about what is the Apple WWDC and why should you care? Well, it's Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, and just as the name suggests, it is a worldwide conference for developers. So if you're a developer and you're keen to develop for Apple, either software applications for an iPhone or an iPad or a Mac or an Apple Watch or the brand new headset, whatever you're using, then this is for you. And that's, I think, where a lot of people get a little bit excited about all these things, because a lot of what we look at, a lot of what is shown at the WWDC isn't the now. For instance, iOS 17 is coming out, but it's not coming out until what they call fall. Now, we know what that means. That's Apple code for in September, when we release the new iPhone, which will almost definitely be called the iPhone 15, we'll have these new features. We'll have these new iOS 17 features. And it's the same iPad OS 17 that's coming out, and Mac OS Sonoma that's coming out. These aren't coming out now. These will come out later in the year here in 2023. If it's not 2023 where you are, well, this is a fairly historic podcast then for you. But, or you may already have all this stuff. Let's go through the details. We're going to go one by one here, just as Apple did, but I'm going to leave out all the hyperbole, all the fancy talk. We're going to get in and make it simple. So the number one thing that I'm excited about is that Apple have actually added a 15-inch MacBook Air. So MacBook Air is Apple's entry-level MacBook, and they're going to bring the 15-inch back. It's available to order if you're listening to this live right now, and it's going to be released next week. So you're going to have this pretty soon. By the time you're listening to this podcast, it's probably out there in the world. So available on the 13th of June, starting at $12.99. Very thin, very stylish, very sleek. And if you're a creator and you're looking at your first Mac, or maybe you've got a very old Intel-based Mac, this is probably going to be something that you'll want to check out, because it has some pretty cool features. It has a lot of stuff going on there. It's got the 15.3-inch screen. It's only 11.5 millimeters thin. Yeah, Apple never used the word thick. They say thin, so it's 11.5 millimeters thin. It's got a 1080p webcam. It's got 3 mics. It's got the M2 chip in there. It's got 18 hours of battery life. It just crushes everything. And like I said, this is Apple dunking on everyone. This is Apple saying how much they're going to crush the competition. If only the competition that they kept using wasn't, PC laptops from 5 years ago and their own Intel laptops from 5 years ago. You can compare apples with apples, Apple, but you can compare your M2 to your M1. It would make a lot more sense. But it just means that now, as well as the original, the OG MacBook Air, that you can get the 13-inch with the M1 chip, you can now go the 13-inch with the M2 chip that they released recently, and now the 15-inch with the M2 chip. And they've even reduced the price of that 13-inch down to $10.99 US as a starting price. So that's always good news. And you know why that's good news? Not just if you're in the market for a brand spanking new MacBook, but what it means is that the older models, the older M1 models, the refurbs that you're going to be able to pick up are going to be cheaper again. I say this all the time, but it's really good. The secondhand market for Apple stuff is really good. The refurbished market's really good. If you're shopping on Amazon or eBay or reputable places, or even Apple's own website, or even in the Apple Store, they've always got refurbished models that they can send your way if you're looking to save a little bit of coin. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say we have affiliate links over at my gear guide, studiolivetoday.com/gear. Or if you're looking for an iPad or an iPhone, you can go to studiolivetoday.com/iPad or studiolivetoday.com/iPhone. I really must add studiolivetoday.com/Mac in the future. But just go to one of the other ones, because if you choose to make a purchase, they break off a chunk and send it to Studio Live Today. That was the first thing there. And I've got my notes here from the day, because I watched the whole 2+ hours, because that's just the kind of guy I am. I commit to this stuff. I watch all the Apple stuff so you don't have to. Let me have to hear buttery smooth mentioned 17 times. You should be able to protect your precious ears from such things. So what did I say here? Well, I basically put in my notes here, does this mean that there's going to be no Apple touchscreen MacBook ever? Now, I famously went out on a limb and I said, there's as much chance of Logic Pro being released on the iPad as a MacBook with a touchscreen. Now that we have Logic Pro on iPad, does that mean we might get the touchscreen Mac? I honestly don't think so. Again, at the risk of being super wrong yet again, which I seem to be very good at doing, I can't see that there's going to be a touchscreen. They've now said this closes the chapter. We've got everything. You've got your 13-inch MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs. You've got your 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. You've got your 15-inch MacBook Airs and some other things that we're going to talk about now, because we have the Mac Studio. The Mac Studio is the little nuggety looking Mac if you're shopping around for them. So the Mac Mini is the cute little adorable one, and the Mac Studio is the awkward adolescent version of the Mac. If the Mac Mini is a toddler, the Mac Studio is a 12-year-old that doesn't quite know what's happening right now. Yes, I just made a puberty reference. But the Mac Studio is a true powerhouse. That's Apple's words, not mine. But it is. It's probably what I'm going to go to next. And they've boosted things. They've introduced the brand new M2 Ultra to go along with the M2 Pro and the M2 Max. Now, the reason that I'm looking at something like this for my home studio, and maybe you would as well, is things like 4 Thunderbolt ports. Now, if you're a music creator or a video creator, you know how important it is to plug your stuff in. And if you have a Mac Mini or you're using an iPad or a MacBook like me, you're living the dongle life, living La Vida dongle. That's Ricky Martin's unfamous B-side from his original Livin' La Vida Loca. But you've got 4 Thunderbolt ports. You've got a proper Ethernet port. You've got HDMI. You've got a headphone jack. Can I get a hallelujah for a headphone jack? I know. Who would have thought that'd be a special order? And 2 old school USB-A ports as well. So, yeah. And it comes in a whole bunch of flavors, the M2 Max and the M2 Ultra. It is just, it's what I thought. This is what this made me think. As soon as they released this and said, yep, we've upgraded, we've maxed out, pun intended, we've maxed out by going to the Ultra, the M2 chip, and we've brought it to the Apple Studio Mac. I thought, this is the end of the Pro, right? Because when Apple first released their M1, their Apple Silicon, their system on a chip, their own brand of internal workings of their computers. That's the technical term for it. They did say at the time, we're going to refresh our entire lineup. Our entire lineup, Johns, will be refreshed. And we've been waiting, because I bought the very first Mac Mini M1 just almost as an experiment, because I'm like, surely this $1,000 was $699 at $10.99 Australian. And I purchased this little Mac Mini because I'm like, there's no way that this can replace my PC. And then it did. and I'm still using it right now to record this podcast, and it's going fine and dandy. But my next computer will probably be the Mac Studio. 8K display support, up to 6 displays, up to 192 gigabytes of RAM, so you can really max this sucker out. And despite its slightly gooberish looks, yep, there you go. I'm calling it. It's a goober of a machine. As opposed to the Mac Mini that's so adorable, the Mac Studio is just a goober. But it's a very powerful goober. As far as goober computers go, it's definitely right up there. So that was the Mac Studio. And then at that point, we're like, well, then that's it, right? They're not going to add anything else. There's not going to be a Mac Pro ever, ever, ever again. And then they said, well, shows what you know, Johns, because we are going to release a brand new Mac Studio. And we're going to, not only that, we're going to own the cheese grater. Now, if you're not watching the video version, if you're listening on audio, go to the Apple website, go look at the Mac Pro. It's a cheese grater. It was designed by Johnny Ive back in the day when he was the Apple chief design guru. And it's an interesting look. But again, because they've now got the M2 Ultra chip, they've got the ability to give you all the power you need. And you might be thinking, well, why? Why would I get a Mac Pro when I can get the exact same chip in a Mac Studio? Well, it all comes down to the fact that you've got internal upgradability. You've actually got 6 PCI slots inside. Now, if you're not technical, don't worry about it, but it just means that unlike the Mac Mini, the Mac Studio, the MacBook Pro, the MacBook Air, none of those are upgradable. They're all system on a chip. You can't even upgrade the memory. You can't add a new hard drive. It is all on the one chip. The difference here with the Mac Pro is you can upgrade it. And because it uses PCIe slots, you got 6 of those in there, you can add things like video cards, output cards for inputting high resolution 8K video. You can add hard drives, so you can get little SSD hard drives of many terabytes on a little PCIe card and use those inside the machine. So these are for your super power users. And I'm not saying that no one in this community is a super power user. Perhaps you are. Perhaps you're lining up to buy one of these suckers, but starting at $69.99, you want to have a reason for it, because I'd go with a Mac Studio for $19.99, and unless you need that expandability, the Mac Studio is potentially not really what you're looking for, but it's there, and it's a good sign. Again, it's a good sign that Apple are committing, and again, it goes back to my dunking thing. Apple are just like, yeah, you think this is good? Boom, we got a MacBook Air that's 15 inches. Take that. Very slim, Ultrabook market. You want some more power? Well, we've got the MacBook Pros. They're still running M2. They're fine. What about your desktop? Yeah, Mac Studio, upgrade it. Boom. You want a Pro version of that? Yeah, here's your Mac Pro, 192 gigabytes of RAM and 6 PCIe slots for expansion. Boom, dunking all the way. So, in terms of new hardware, we were already pretty happy. If you're an Apple fan person or even an Apple observer or an Apple fence sitter like me, you'd be looking at this stuff going, there's plenty to get excited about. I've got so many different options now. And as I keep saying again and again, even if you're not at the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of this kind of gear, there is so much. If you go all the way back to the M1 and how excited Apple were and how impressed people like me, long time, 30 plus years, Windows PC users like me switched, and that's what Apple are planning now. If you're wondering what's the strategy, what's the vision, it's very clear. What Apple are saying now is, if you have an Apple Mac that is using Intel, come over to our silicon, come to the Apple M1 and M2 world, because it's going to be so much better, and we've let you just have your old Intel for a while, but just come with us, because this is the direction we're going now. And Apple even said in the presentation, they said, this is the best time for a PC user to upgrade, and we're going to see a lot of people switching over to Macs. Join us, become one of us. Yes, so that's the hardware. The software side, and again, as a creator, what does this all mean for you? Well, it just means that there's more options, and there's some great bits of hardware out there. So for you, if you're recording, if you're using GarageBand or using Logic Pro or using Reaper, or you're just recording in voice memos, or you're using LumaFusion to edit videos, or you're using Final Cut Pro, All these machines are going to crush all of that. So you've got choices. You've got choices there. We'll have a quick drink, and then we'll talk about the software, because Worldwide Developers Conference is also all about iOS and iPadOS and watchOS and tvOS and all the OSs. Vision OS. Yeah, again, I'm burying the lead. We're going to go with it. One more thing at the end. iOS 17. What have they added? Well, they've added a few things. Personal contact posters, live voicemail, which is transcribing your voicemail messages, which is pretty cool. It's got check-in, which is a new security feature to help when people are going from one place to another. So your kids are going to their friend's place, you can tell it to check in with you and automatically send you a message when they arrive. That's pretty cool. Autocorrect. And look, I laughed during this. Again, I'm a bit weird. I laughed because Craig Federighi, who's a bit of an Apple institution now, he was talking about yes, ducking autocorrect. No more ducking autocorrect errors. So yeah, they're using now. Interestingly, Apple didn't mention AI. They didn't mention artificial intelligence. They didn't mention that keyword that everyone's talking about. They mention things like machine learning and things like this. So they mention the fact that autocorrect is going to improve because it's machine learning. And standby mode, that's looking pretty cool. You can put your Apple phone, your Apple phone, they should have called it that. You can put your iPhone on a stand and put it into standby mode, and it's a clock, or it's the weather, or it's your alarms. And instead of saying, hey, Goober, you just say Goober. And you know what I mean when I say Goober, the S word. Instead of saying, hey, the S word, you simply say S word. iPadOS has widgets on the lock screen. It's got a lock screen, so it's got the same thing we have on iPhone, which is about time. Live activities, so you can track your sports, and your widgets can show all your things. You can. This was funny again. I know I'm a dad, so I like lame dad jokes. So Craig Federighi saying that, and we've got multiple timers for the first time ever. And he's like, yeah, innovative, isn't it? Like it was really well put. I like it. The health app has come to the iPad. PDF documents. They talked a lot about PDF documents, which seriously, it was like being back in my office job. I've never thought or talked about PDF documents for as long in my life, but they wanted to tell us all about the PDF documents. Stage Manager's getting some improvements, but I didn't really talk much about Stage Manager, which I thought there would be some more updates on that. So iPadOS and iOS, these are iterative changes. This is evolutionary, not revolutionary, folks, because we're at version 17. Like that, don't lose. I know people get disappointed when there's not some amazing new revolutionary feature, but then you got to think we're actually already there. We're on version 17. I remember when iOS 7 came out and they changed everything, and I didn't like it. They went from the bubbly. What do they call that thing? I always forget the word, but that bubbly thing where things look like things, and then they went to this flat sort of screen layout. And I'm like, ooh, I don't like it. Is it anamorphized? No, it's not that. But you know the word. Someone, if you're watching this on the premiere of this podcast, someone's correcting me there. And if you're listening, you're yelling at your podcast player saying it's yeah, I've forgotten. So yeah, it's evolutionary. What about Mac OS? Well, this is where, you know how they've been dunking? Apple have been dunking on everyone else. The one interesting thing, so Apple Mac OS is going to be called Sonoma, which apparently is a wine country in Northern California. There was a few little things. Web apps, you're going to be able to share passwords and passkeys. Safari private browsing is improving. There's going to be, I don't even know what presenter overlay means. Oh yeah, I do. That's FaceTime, where you can put your face over things and do like a pretend green screen kind of thing. If you're watching the video version of this, you're seeing my home studio, my bedroom studio. So you realize I don't really go down those tracks of trying to pretend I'm somewhere I'm not. But if you do want to do like a presentation and put your face over it, you can do that. But the most interesting thing to me, and look, this isn't a gaming channel or a gaming podcast, but I know that there's some crossover between people that like technology, people that like music and video creation, and video games, because many of us are getting on in years, and many of us came up through the ranks, and we like technology. So we had Commodore 64s, we had Atari 8-bit computers, we had Atari 2600s and 5200s and 7800s and 12,000. No, there wasn't an Atari 12,000. There might have been. PlayStations and Xboxes and Nintendo Wii's, and I'm just naming things now. Dreamcast. Who had the Dreamcast? I freaking loved the Dreamcast. I loved it so much I nearly swore. I loved the Dreamcast. But yeah, so many of us have a crossover into gaming. And Apple said some interesting things. There's game mode that's going to be part of the new Mac OS, which is going to be a mode you go into on your Mac specifically for gaming. It's going to make sure that you get, I guess, better resolutions and frame rates and lower latency and all that sort of stuff for gaming. The creator of a game called Death Standing, which I must admit I'm not aware of. I'm not a huge gamer. I like video games, but I'm not a gamer. They came on and said, yeah, I've been so excited. I've always wanted to get a game on the Mac, and this is going to be epic. Not Epic Games. That's a different story. Apple don't like those epic games. That's it. Yeah. So they've come out and said gaming is going to be a thing, and then the other thing they've done is they've introduced a game porting toolkit. So this means that if developers have got games that run on Windows, they can actually bring those into this toolkit. And look, it's not going to perfectly port them and represent them in the new setup and be able to play them on your Mac immediately, but it does mean that they're going to be able to test it and see how well it will run. And to me, this is not the final frontier, but for me, it was I used to be not big PC gamer, I used to PC game a bit. And for me, I was like, well, look, my PC can do everything, and when I'm done with work, I can play a game. My Mac does absolutely everything, and it does it way better than my PC ever did, but I can't game on it. Like, I know Apple Arcade, I know some games are on Apple, but yeah, it's not a gaming platform. So to have Bluetooth controller support, to have the ability to port over Windows games for developers, watch this space, because I'm not saying that Apple are going to take over the world of gaming, but even if they just dip their toe, and even if it could remove some of those last barriers for folks that might, because you think of a Mac Studio or even just a Mac Mini that's all kitted out with the M2 Pro, or especially like a Mac Pro, like, yeah, these things are expensive, but compared to a gaming PC, not so much. And I know the gamers are going to be like, but you've got to have your Radeon external graphics processors, and you've got to have your separate independent graphics memory from, you can't have a system on a chip system. But we said that about video editing. We said that about audio production. We said that about a lot of things. And Apple have kind of proven us wrong. So I say watch this space around gaming. The rest of the stuff, I'm not going to go into detail, because we like to keep this podcast around about the 30-minute mark, and we haven't even touched on the one more thing. But in terms of what else, watchOS has some cool screen distance stuff and some mental health stuff that they threw in there. The AirPods are getting adaptive audio, which is basically a combination between transparency and active noise cancelling. So it's going to listen to your environment, and it's actually going to adapt. So that's pretty cool. As someone who uses the AirPods Pro 2 and relies on them, that's going to be a good thing for me. So a lot going on, a lot announced at WWDC. Again, is any of it earth-shattering? Is any of it going to change or move the needle for many folks? Not really, unless, of course, you want to consider the big news, the big new device from Apple, and it is called the Vision Pro. Now, this was rumored before everything happened, before WWDC. There's been rumors that Apple have been working on a VR or AR, so VR, virtual reality, AR, augmented reality headset for the longest time, for years and years and years. And it turns out that's exactly what they've been doing. They've been spending billions of dollars on research and development, and they have developed and researched and are going to release, and I say going to because this one can't be ordered this week and this one won't be shipped next week. This is coming in quote unquote early 2024. And it appears it's only coming to the US because there is no pricing for anywhere else. There is no availability mentioned for anywhere else. So this is coming to the US. Now, why am I talking about this on a podcast that's about creating music primarily, creating media, creating video music and sharing your music, creating, recording, releasing music? Well, it's what everyone's talking about, for one. But for two, it's the first, what they're calling a spatial computing device, meaning that it can actually do some pretty funky things. Now, if you're listening on the audio version, you're going to have to jump over to the Apple website and take a look, because there's a lot going on here. What you basically get is a headset. Now, it does have an external battery pack, so that's first thing up there. You strap it to your head. It still looks a little bit like a pair of ski goggles, or similar to like the Oculus Quest type stuff, but there's some key differences. Number one, You don't have any controllers. You use your fingers to tap. So it's got so many cameras, it's got so many sensors that you don't have to have any controllers. You use just your fingers to tap. You get screens that you can pull up in front of you. And the biggest difference, if you're thinking about VR and you're thinking, like, so maybe you've used an Oculus Quest or what are the Meta Quest now, or the Microsoft HoloLens, or you remember Google Glass and the nerd goggles that kind of failed with that. If you're thinking in terms of that, it's very different from that, because it is really what Apple are really pushing here is that it's going to be more about a device that you use in the real world. And yes, it can do the VR stuff, and yes, you can put the backgrounds in it. Yes, you can wear it on a plane and pretend you're not on a plane. But a lot of it that people are happy about and think is interesting, but also that's being criticized, is it's about using this sort of device in the real world. So when you're around other people, it'll actually sort of show other people around you, and it'll show a creepy pair of eyes. Look, the eyes have definitely been memed, and they're going to be not cool for some people, because what it does is it takes like a photo of your eyes and it uses those on the outside. It's actually got little LCD screens on the outside of the glasses, which is kind of weird. You can FaceTime with it as well, and again, when you're FaceTiming, it shows like not AI, but a generated version of you that's not really you. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to be in a video conference with a robot version of my friends and colleagues. It's it's interesting. But look, there's no doubt that this. I'm sound like I'm being negative. There's no doubt that this thing is revolutionary. I know I said everything else was evolutionary. This is the first thing that Apple had released that is revolutionary, pretty much since the iPhone or the iPad. And the reason I mention those things is that, to me, this is for the older folks, the more experienced, as I like to say, folks that are watching and listening. This is like the Apple Newton. Do you remember the Apple Newton? It was like a message pad. It was expensive. It was chunky and clunky. It didn't work great, and it didn't sell well, and it definitely didn't last. But what it did is it made other operators, other businesses like Palm and Handspring go, that's a pretty good idea, but we're just going to tweak it to make it like this. And then what did Apple do with the iPhone? Well, they took the initial learnings they got from the Apple Newton. They took what other developers were doing, like Palm and Handspring and like BlackBerry, and they went, let's make a one communicated device that uses a touchscreen, but that actually makes it usable. So you ain't tapping away with a stylus. You're actually able to use this with your finger. Those watching on the video version are seeing the creepiness of the creepy eyes. She's staring into my soul. And apparently the eyes follow you around the room if you're in the room with someone wearing one of these things, which is mildly disturbing, just saying. But yeah, there's no doubt that this is amazing, innovative technology, but there's also no doubt that this is version 1. In fact, I'd go so far as to say this is version 0.1 of this device. This is something that is going to be good in the future. But just like the iPhone 1 was pretty dodgy, it didn't have copy and paste. Don't forget, no copy and paste, no app store. And who bought the first iPhone? Rich people and bleeding edge early adopters that wanted the latest and greatest. Who's going to buy this? Rich people and bleeding edge early adopters that want the latest and greatest, and developers, because just like the iPhone and the iPad, this will only be as good as the applications you can use it with. So, GarageBand, can you air drum? Can you air guitar? Can I just wear this thing and be eyeball it? Because here's the weird thing. I buried the lead with this. You know how I said you click? You might be thinking, how do you point and click? You look at it. It uses your eyes. It uses your eyeballs and it tracks them and it sees what you're looking at, and then you click it by tapping your fingers. It's it's science fiction stuff here, folks. But it has the M2 chip in there. It also has an R1 chip, which is what they call their reality one. So just like the A chip were their portable, so we're up to the A16 chips in your iPhones. We're up to the M2 chip for the Macs. So now the R chips will start to that. It uses your eyes to log in. It's going to be interesting. I sit firmly on the fence with this sort of stuff. Like I'm not willing to get out there and be. I could have gone out there and been all clickbaity and just said, look. You'll probably look at the thumbnail. If you're watching the video, you look at the thumbnail and it'll have some picture of me pretending to wear them, going, huh? But Yeah, that's because I am still quite confused. I need more information, need more input. I'm like Johnny Five in Short Circuit. I need more input because I don't know where this is going, but I can't wait to watch. To be really honest, as someone that likes to sit on the sidelines and just see what other people do with things and see where technology goes, I can't wait to see what happens with this. I think it's going to be fascinating to see who gets this, what it's actually like, because it could be an absolute giant failure flop. It could be the next huge thing, and they release a non-pro version that's like a pair of goggles or a pair of sunglasses, and everyone buys one. And in the future, it's all going to be Ready Player One style. We're all just going to be sitting with our goggles on in a dystopian future. Or it could be somewhere in between, that this is an iterative thing along the path. This is just version point one. And when we get to version one and then version two, remember, the iPhone is at 15. Yeah, the iPhone 15, even though they skipped the 9, so it's not actually, and they skipped the 2. Anyway, we've had about about 11 or 12 iPhones at this point, and we've had 17 versions of iOS. So things are iterating over time, and the same with GarageBand, and the same with Logic Pro. When people are complaining about Logic Pro not having everything, it's version one, and it's still amazing. It's still amazing what these things can do, and I think the Vision Pro it'll be fun to track. It'll be fun to see what happens with this. The one thing I will say is it looks more like a consumption device. I know that they're pushing the fact that, yeah, you can do your work with it and you can, to me, that's going to be harder. If I had the choice right now of strapping a pair of screens to my face and doing this live stream, or setting up my thumbnails for my shows for the weekend, or doing my mail newsletter that's going out, studiolivetoday.com/email, then I don't think I would do that if I could just roll up to my screen and look at a nice 27-inch screen in front of me, a keyboard and a physical mouse. I look at my screen and I do my thing. But it doesn't mean that the paradigm of that shouldn't be tested. Shifting paradigms is something that yeah, God, feels like I'm in my corporate days. But yeah, there's going to be fun things ahead, and like me, if you just want to watch along, I'll be keeping an eye on this stuff. All of the Apple developments will be talked about and probably analysed out the wazoo here on Studio Live today. What do you think? I'm intrigued about what you think about this. Do you think this is going to be flop? Do you think this is going to be absolute success? Are you excited? Will you buy one? Let me know. Please do. Let me know if this is something that you can see yourself using in the future. Are you an AR, VR kind of person? Do you get nauseous from some of this stuff and don't like using it at all? Or are you somewhere in between where you're like, interesting concept, I'll wait and see. I'll let the other people be the guinea pigs. Poor guinea pigs. They get a bad name. They get a bad rap, the old guinea pigs. Anyway, that is going to do it for this episode of Studio Live Today podcast. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, the audio version, you can go to studiolivetoday.com/podcast. You can also search Studio Live Today in your podcast app of choice. Check out the video version. We do. We usually stream the video version live, at least a replay of it as a premiere on the YouTube channel. So you can check out the YouTube channel, Studio Live Today on YouTube, or just go to studiolivetoday.com, because that has links to absolutely everything. All the ways you can get in touch with me. You can join the community. You can become a patron at Patreon, and you can subscribe and keep up to date with everything going on around this community. As we say at the end of each and every show here on Studio Live Today, please be kind to yourself, be kind to others, keep creating, and watch out for people wearing dodgy masks, because you never know if they're really looking at you. See you next time.